This video is now in session, and the California gubernatorial recall election has shown that Gavin Newsom will not be recalled. So Gavin Newsom will stay in his position as governor until 2022, and you can see here that he has so far won by a pretty large margin, by close to 20%, close to 30%, more exactly 27% in terms of the margins, and that's very large. We predicted that he would win by around 18%, not 27%, but obviously there's still 26% of the vote left to count, so we'll see what the final result will be. But nonetheless, Gavin Newsom has prevailed, primarily because of Larry Elder. So this election, even though it's in a very democratic state, it can still give a lot of indications as to what will happen in 2022. So the first thing that Democrats have found out is that campaigning against Trumpism is a really big deal, because for a lot of people dislike Trump, and that is a rallying call for them to go out and vote. Larry Elder was a gift to Gavin Newsom. Larry Elder, by the way, is the opposition candidate. He was a gift to Gavin Newsom because he campaigned on Trump politics, and Gavin Newsom seized on that and won in the recall election. So it gives a path for Democrats in 2022 to campaign against Trumpism, because it has shown to work. The second thing is that if Kevin Falconer or a more reputable Republican was actually running against Gavin Newsom, he could have very well been in trouble. We saw in August where the polls were almost dead even, between Gavin Newsom being recalled and Larry Elder taking place. Between Gavin Newsom being recalled and not being recalled. And that's important to note, because it shows that if a moderate Republican was actually running against Gavin Newsom who couldn't be tied to Trumpism, then there's a chance that that Republican would have had the infrastructure to win an election. So for Gavin Newsom, he was essentially, Larry Elder was a gift to him, because Larry Elder was this conservative talk show radio host, which already destroys his credibility in a state so democratic like California. And then he also campaigned on Trump politics. He campaigned against abortion, and then he also delved into the culture wars. So for Larry Elder, his blunders is something that a lot of Republicans will have to avoid in 2022, because Democrats are going to do the same thing that Trump did in 2020. In 2020, Trump attempted to tie Democrats to socialism, and he got pretty far with it. If we look at the 2020 election, for the first presidential election in a decade, Republicans gained more seats than the Democrats, and the Republicans essentially narrowed the margins between Democrats and Republicans in the House to 222 to 213. So that's a very narrow margin. A lot of these seats that Democrats flipped in 2018 flipped back to the Republican Party in 2020. For example, New Mexico's 2nd District, Florida's 26th District, Florida's 27th District. All of these seats, competitive seats, flipped back to the Republican Party, in part because Democrats were tied to socialism. So the same tactic is going to be done by Democrats in 2022. Associate everyone in the Republican Party with Trump values. Associate individuals like Young Kim in California's 39th District as a rubber stamp for Trump policies. That's the tactic that many Democrats are going to try to do in 2022, because that's what they found has been most successful, tying people to Trump politics. And this has always been a question after Trump left office, which is, would the Democrats actually be effective if they kept campaigning against Trump? And it turns out it seems to be working. It seems to be doing just fine. And we'll get a bigger sense of that hypothesis, or I guess a bigger conclusive result of that hypothesis, in Virginia in 2020, later this year. But for now, it seems to be working. For now, in competitive places, campaigning against Trumpism turns out the Democratic base, and it also it also reminds the moderates why they voted for the Democrats in the first place. So, if that's effective in 2022, there needs to be more. Obviously, there'll need to be more elections to fully determine that, but. For the Democratic Party, it's a new style of campaigning that they can engage in. And for the Republican side, they need to realize that they need more moderate candidates that cannot be tied to Trumpism, because that is what turns out the Democratic base. And if you have a moderate candidate, that doesn't mean that the Republican Trump base won't turn out. Trump could easily campaign for a moderate, or I guess Republicans could easily show force for a moderate candidate, reputable Republicans within the Trump base, like Lindsey Graham or potentially Chris Christie. If they campaign for moderate moderate candidates, then they will have credibility, and that is the worst thing for the Democratic Party, which is moderate Republicans, because the moderate Republicans have shown in 2020 to win in elections. So that's what California's gubernatorial election has shown us. Campaigning on Trump politics has worked, and it will continue to work. For the Democrats, though, it's not like campaigning against Trump will be the ultimate thing that they need to do, because for a lot of districts, the next question is going to be, will moderate voters care enough? Because moderate voters, they recognize that Trump is no longer in office. So with that, if we look at more competitive counties in California, like Fresno County, Stanislaus County, Placer County, and as well as Orange County, you can see, and also Riverside County, you can see many of them are still competitive. In Fresno County, even though this county voted for Biden in 2020 by 7%, you can see here that they voted yes for the recall by 0.4 percentage points. Here in Stanislaus County, it's around 3.4%. Placer County, it's also around 2.2%. The only two competitive counties that voted against the recall are Orange County and Riverside County. Riverside County is the only county from 2018 that flipped from voting against Gavin Newsom to voting for Gavin Newsom. So you can see here that the margin is around 4.2%, and then here the margin is around 0.4% in favor of John Cox, who was the Republican candidate at the time. In Orange County, you can see that there was a 0.2% win for Gavin Newsom. Here in this election, there's around a 5.2% shift to Gavin Newsom by voting no in the recall. So there's a mixed result in terms of competitive counties in California, and this is going to be the main trouble for the Democrats, which is, are they going to be able to convince moderates that the Republican Party is too much towards Trump for their own good? If Democrats can effectively convey that message to the moderates, to moderate voters, then they can actually do well in the 2022 election, at least in the Senate. In the House, they're still most likely going to lose the majority, but they may be able to blunt that dissent if they focus on appealing to moderate voters and then turning out their progressive base. And to appeal to moderate voters, they have to convince them that Trump is still alive in the Republican Party, and that Democrats are still able to effectively govern. Because right now, we're seeing legislation being stalled in Congress. The $3.5 trillion budget plan stalled in Congress. Vote invites stalled in Congress. The only real tangible progress that Democrats can say, or I guess the only real tangible achievement that Democrats can say that they've done, is the pandemic relief. Besides that, there has not been many other things. Infrastructure and the budget bill is still on the table. It hasn't passed Congress yet. And then the voting rights, it's unlikely to pass Congress. Healthcare, unlikely to get any traction. So a lot of these kitchen table issues and a lot of economic issues are not being rectified, with the only exception being the pandemic. So if we look, if we look at the generic polling between Democrats and Republicans, Democrats lead by around 5%, but that emulates what happened in the 2014 election, where the Democrats initially started out with the lead. But the most important part is the later stages of the campaign. Stage generic polls are often accurate, and in 2014, even though the Democrats initially led, in the end, the Republicans were able to make 2014 an election that favored them. So they retook the Senate, and then they maintained their majority in the House. So if Joe Biden wants to get anything done after 2022, he'll definitely need to ramp up his lobbying for legislation, which is what he is doing. But this California election has shown tactics that both Republicans and Democrats can use in 2022. And this is really the first election that has actually produced notable conclusions. We'll see if these conclusions stick around in Virginia, because Virginia is a more competitive state than California. And if they do stick around, then that just cements the fact that Republicans need moderate candidates, or I guess candidates at the very least can best win an election. And then Democrats need to figure out how to turn out the moderate base by, I guess, convincing them that Trump is still very well the leader and the driving force in the Republican Party. So that's the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed it. This video is now adjourned, and I'll see you in the next one.